and welcome to the Kink Perspective. My name's Chris. I'm a psychotherapist and consultant. On today's show, I'm going to dive into a complex and often misunderstood facet of the BDSM community. A style of play that's a little bit on the darker edge of the taboos that some of us get involved in inside of the lifestyle. Today, I want to jump in and talk about consensual non-consent, more commonly known to many of us as CNC. Now, my hope here today is to kind of provide a little bit of an exploration into and of CNC, especially when it pertains to the lifestyle community itself. I want to talk about definitions, the types, some of the psychological underpinnings, and the profound connection it shares even with trauma. Now, consensual non-consent does involve this consensual enactment of scenarios where one person willingly relinquishes control to another, often involving elements, though, of power dynamics, dominance, and their submission. But it does challenge the conventional notions of consent by exploring negotiated boundaries that allow participants to engage in these intense, role-played scenarios of the power exchange. Now, these scenarios are meticulously negotiated, or should be beforehand, and are grounded in mutual trust and understanding. And today, we're going to unravel this whole psychological motivations behind some of CNC, its implications for personal empowerment, and how it even intersects with trauma's narratives within the BDSM context. So first, I think here what's really important is to start with a basic understanding, or a little bit of a deeper understanding, if you will, of CNC. So, consensual non-consent really is a complex and negotiated practice within the lifestyle. And this is where people consensually simulate non-consensual interactions. Now, unlike traditional notions of consent, CNC involves explicit agreements where one party willingly gives up that control and trust to someone else. And it does it allowing for these people to enact scenarios that may include physical restraint, psychological domination, kidnapping, just to name a few. Some extreme elements of torture, both, many, some, one, or none. Now, this practice does hinge on a deep understanding of boundaries, trust, and the explicit negotiation of what limits and safe words we are going to have within the setup scene. Now, there are different types of CNC scenarios, and they all vary widely in exploring each one of the different aspects of power control, dynamics, and control. Now, could we argue that physical domination is a part of CNC? And now this type of domination, or this type of CNC, involves physical restraint, bondage, and some other forms of physical control, where one partner may simulate overpowering and restraining the other. Next comes the psychological domination. And in this type of CNC scenario, the focus is on manipulating emotions or mental states rather than the physical restraint. Now, this can include fear play, degradation and humiliation, intense psychological control, and these are all designed to kind of invoke specific emotional responses from somebody. Next, we have the fantasy role plays, and now these scenarios often incorporate specific themes such as abduction, interrogation, disciplinary actions. Now, people that are involved in this usually negotiate detailed script and scenarios to explore their dynamics within this consensual, non-consensual framework. Then there is the total power exchange aspect in CNC dynamics, where they extend beyond sexual encounters into broader aspects of their relationship or their daily life. Now, this can include decisions about finances, household responsibilities. All of these things get negotiated, but they end up taking a much more deliberate action and understanding over their partners and all the things that are going on. Another type of form of CNC kinks is most commonly what a lot of people are drawn to is the rape fantasy, where one individual's role-playing, engaging in a sexual assault simulation towards another. There's the kidnapping, where one person is believing to be kidnapped by somebody else, blackmailing, and so on. One real interesting aspect here is the somonophilia, which this is a scenario here Well, one person's actually sleeping while the other person performs some sort of sexual act with them. Now, again, all of these acts are done consensually. They're negotiated beforehand. The participants do know what's going to happen. Maybe sometimes they don't know exactly when. There's sometimes struggles often involved. All of these different aspects that end up coming into the whole variety here of what people do. But understanding CNC really involves recognizing the consensual nature and structured frameworks that facilitate these explorations of these intense dynamics, both sexual and psychological. Now, these scenarios are carefully negotiated and should be to ensure all parties involved feel safe, are respected, and able to explore their desires with an agreed upon boundary. Now, here, what really becomes a psychological draw towards CNC? Now, if we engage in CNC within the BDSM context, this does tap into this deep-seated psychological motivations and desires for our eroticism and our fantasies. Now, for a lot of people, I believe the appeal lies here in the intricate interplay of power dynamics and the controlled exploration of these taboo fantasies. Now, there is some research that suggests individuals drawn to not only BDSM, but more specifically CNC, often exhibit traits such as openness to new experiences, sensation seeking, and a willingness to explore aspects of their sexuality that diverge from societal norms. Now, the appeal here of CNC can be understood through several psychological lenses, if you will. First, the structured role play here allows people to temporarily step into roles that challenge their traditional power dynamics and even traditional notions of their sexuality and sexual components. For the submissive person, surrendering control can be a way to explore their vulnerabilities and relinquish responsibility in that controlled environment that heightens this emotional intensity and arousal for them. On the other hand, the dominant person obviously is going to be finding that fulfillment, if you will, in orchestrating that scenario and pushing these boundaries and providing a sense of mastery and control within that agreed upon framework of consent. But moreover here, CNC often incorporates these elements of taboo and the forbidden desires, which add that additional layer of the psychological intrigue, if you will. The act of engaging in behaviors that simulate these non-consensual interactions while maintaining strict boundaries of consent does allow people to explore the fantasies that may be considered socially or ethically unacceptable by everyday context. Now, the dichotomy here between the taboo nature of the fantasy and the consensual nature of this enactment underscores this whole complexity and the psychological depth inherent in CNC play. Fantasy plays a major role in CNC dynamics. It serves as the catalyst for arousal and emotional exploration. People often negotiate detailed scenes where they're catering to the specific psychological triggers or desires such as abduction or scenarios that involve intense psychological manipulation, if you will. They're really immersing themselves here in these scripted roles to safely explore and confront their deepest fantasies. They gain insights into their own desires and even the boundaries within a supported and negotiated framework. They're allowed to rebuild themselves in certain context. Now, understanding the psychological draw to CNC play requires this appreciation of motivations, desires, erotic fantasies, and the emotional area that we all permeate, that everybody participants, that we all agree to navigate together. Now, by exploring these aspects, we do gain deeper insights into the whole complex interplay of power and fantasy and exploration that characterizes CNC very well, especially within the BDSM community. What's interesting to note, the majority of the fantasies that come out of CNC are more often, in one study, it was reported that more often that the fantasies that come out of it, the top ones being either abduction or simulated rape fantasies, tend to come from women. About 78% of the reporting was mainly women looking to report these types. The other ones, there were some interesting percentages on different ones as well when you get into humiliation and degradation. it's all interesting because I think there is always these underpinnings. I have often heard throughout the years, even when I worked in law enforcement a long time ago, that there was always this underpinning for women to explore this in a fantasized way with a partner that they trusted. But I don't know if that's inherently true for every woman because there is no probably study on the planet that's ever really conducted that. But, a cross-sectional study, I think once that was done, of people's deepest sexual fantasies of around 10,000 participants did reveal high numbers of this, specifically looking at women, but completely different story. And I don't want to kind of go off too much on all the data I don't have, but it is quite interesting in these two specific articles that I looked at that this is where the top fantasies kind of really were the tops that people wanted to explore, and who of the two partners and in their gender types was pushing that exploration. But there is often a question that I have heard is, are there any connections here to trauma? Now, it's really kind of interesting that when people ask that. Now, the whole exploration of power dynamics and role play often does involve intense emotional and psychological elements for many of us that get involved. Now, for many people, I would assume CNC represents an extreme form of eroticization and powerlessness, right? Where the consensual suspension of control can lead to a profound psychological experience. And this practice is not about actual non-consent, but about consensually exploring the dynamics of power, trust, and vulnerability. Because you got to remember, the first part of CNC is consensual non-consent. And I think there is a lot of people that kind of go, ooh, cool, taboo, we're going to do this fantasy or that fantasy, or we're going to have sex while you're asleep, and ha ha ha, you've actually already consented. Now, if we look at it in that framework, maybe that, starting to understand that diminishes some of the capacity for some people. Maybe it's possible that they ignore this part of the CNC when they're discussing it, so they can remain in a heightened state during those elements of play. It does bring to mind where I was working with somebody a long time ago, and they were involved in this part of the lifestyle, which is great. Healthy exploration, and no problem with that. But even where I raised an alarm bell was that they had this particular person who was engaging in CNC, had no safety protocols in place, was just kind of meeting people off the internet, doing a scene, letting them spend the night. So there was a lot of boundary crossing, a lot of negotiations that they were telling me that actually never really transpired. But I think the thing that was a little bit more nerve-wracking was, and just from a straight safety angle of this, there were no safety protocols involved. There was no, I have somebody to text before and after my scene, especially that I'm meeting with two strangers, things of this nature. So I think if you're going to participate, especially if you're a solo player and you're meeting with people you've never met before and you're going to get engaged in this, if you're an adult, do what you want. But I would think in this day and age, it might be better to have a safety protocol in place. Let somebody know, hey, I'm going to go and visit. You don't have to tell them what you're doing, but, hey, I'm going over to so-and-so's house. I'm going to be there roughly an hour or two. You're my check-in, and I will check in with you roughly once I'm done. No more, shouldn't be more than 2.5 hours, right? Some sort of rough time estimate. Safety protocols, because in this day and age, we all need to be safe. But I want to kind of get back to this therapeutic exploration here. Now, there is some explorations on some research that CNC can serve as a therapeutic tool for participants who have experienced past trauma. Now, let me expand on that. There is a difference between something being therapeutic and being therapy. Now, often, I think a lot of people hear therapeutic and then they think it's a form of therapy, and that's anything can be therapeutic. Listening to music or going for a run, playing basketball, playing video games, all these things can be therapeutic. That doesn't make them therapy. Now, CNC can be therapeutic to some people who have experienced trauma. Yes, you did not hear that wrong. And by engaging in certain scenarios where surrender and control in a safe and consensual environment where they're controlling the dynamics and they can understand what's about to happen, it can individuals may confront and process their feelings of powerlessness and lack of agency. This can kind of help them get this back. Potentially, and I have spoken with victims after their own sexual assault. And this allows the process for them to facilitate empowerment for themselves and rewrite the narratives of their victimhood into narratives of resilience, for example. But again, it's not therapy. It can be therapeutic, but it's got to obviously be with someone you trust. There's a lot of steps there. So I want to make that clear because I don't want people to come back and say, hey, Chris was saying, we should do this as therapy, because I'm not saying that at all. All right. This leads me to this next point of it really does a reclamation of agency. And through CNC, people can reclaim a sense of their control over their past traumas. Now, you can consensually reenact scenarios that invoked, a past experience or of loss of control, or they can allow somebody to assert agency and transform their relationship with trauma. This reclamation of agency is not only empowering, but can serve as a form of psychological resilience and building. It also can lead to identity exploration. Now, additionally, here, CNC allows people to explore and affirm the aspects of their sexual identity in a safe and supportive environment. But by engaging in CNC, it really does challenge their societal understanding of expectations and normalities, and people can validate and celebrate their desires and preferences and contribute to really a positive sense of self here. But I think CNC within the BDSM context here allows people the opportunity for a deep psychological exploration and potential growth. I'm not going to say you will, because no one knows what's going to happen unless you try something, but the reality is it also can have downsides, and you have to be prepared for that. A scene doesn't go the way you want, it becomes too triggering, it becomes too much. You have to have a lot of mechanisms in place. Now, by engaging in some of these things and relinquishing or assuming control, we do get a chance to navigate really complex emotions here and explore potentially past experiences, whether good or bad. But you have to do this. I recommend doing this only with someone you extremely trust. Meeting somebody for the first time, probably not a good idea to do it, but you're all consenting adults. If you are doing these explorations, you need to understand the reality of what goes through dealing with something like this and what is the potential of happening if you're not prepared. I'm not talking about ultimately knowing how every scenario is going to pan out, but the reality is how much risk have you assessed? And I've talked recently about risk with somebody, and we really don't assess our risk or our own agency enough. So I think that's something to really take into context here. Now, this is kind of a great segue into the whole safety aspect of all of this. Now, we understand that all of these non-consensual acts, these scenarios here, even though they're going to be meticulously planned, they're going to be agreed upon by everybody. We're going to get consent up front. Pardon me. We're going to get consent up front. We're not going to change the scene. We're going to go through the scene how we agreed upon, so nothing is new or scary for anyone. This starts bringing in, well, what else do we do next? What are some of the other things we could do? Well, you could create signals, a hand signal if something's going on, or invoking safe words depending on who you are, or not. Maybe something else. You're going to have maybe you're going to run a time limit on how long this scene's going to go for, right? All of these things become important that you're setting up to protect both sides. Now, research does underscore the significance of clear communication and negotiation, all of the things that we do. This is not something that I think any one person if you've been in the lifestyle for about 5 minutes, you hear people constantly preach about communication and effort and negotiation. I talk about it literally every time you fire up my show. I'm always talking about communication. it's really, really important that everything revolves in the CNC world around informed and enthusiastic consent. And you mitigate this whole risk of any violations if you're not changing anything after you agreed. We all understand what SSC is, safe and sane and consensual, or RAC, risk aware consensual kink. And these things do underscore the importance of being, or they don't underscore the importance, I should say, of being fully aware of the potential risks and taking steps to minimize them along the way. You have to do these things. You have to understand what the impact of what you are about to do and how it may affect you. If you're not sure, not only maybe talk to the person that you're involved with, maybe consider talking to somebody else that you trust or getting to know that you want to do one of these scenes, or maybe you are part of the CNC community and you want to reach out anonymously and talk to somebody about what their first experience was like. So you can have a little bit of a preconception in your mind of how things might go down. If you're not prepared, if you are not ready, my favorite new saying, thanks to Miss Kitten, if you don't have the capacity, don't play. Stop it. You can renegotiate the scene for another day. At all times, any person can say no. Not just a submissive dominance. You all can stop a scene. If a scene is going badly, you notice the partner's, maybe getting overly upset or deeply emotional, or they're the pre-negotiated screams of terror that they might let out now are starting to sound a little bit too realistic, and maybe you are concerned they didn't, consider or fathom the depth of the intensity of what's going to happen to them. Stop the scenes, right? Have your safety scissors there, or quick release handcuffs, all these things, so people don't feel confined. But capacity. Be well prepared, be well negotiated, discuss what the scene is, don't change it, both consent. Hell, put it on a piece of paper that you both consented to this. When you do it, you show up, you do your scene, you don't alter the scene, you go through the scene. Afterwards, as you're coming down, maybe not that day, maybe that day, who knows, you talk about it. What you guys enjoyed, what you didn't enjoy. And then you build for the next time, right? And no matter who's asking to change the scene, no one changes the scene. The moment you try to do consent in the moment and change the scene, you are going to ruin the scene. And you're going to deem yourself as someone not worthy of playing with, right? So I want to kind of expand a little bit more here into some of the scenarios that are inside of the CNC spectrum. But, here at one end of the spectrum of CNC is the more mild scenarios that may involve, again, verbal role play like bondage. All of these exist in a predefined network of the consent boundaries that we've agreed to. Now, these scenarios might often serve as an introduction to exploring power exchange dynamics, or incorporate some elements of surprise or anticipation without crossing into the extreme physical or emotional intensity that CNC can often carry. But as we move that sliding scale from maybe the left to the right, we start hitting the more moderate CNC scenarios. These could start to involve heightened psychological tension, physical control, simulated abduction here, interrogation scenes. That's a bread and butter of mine. And they're really intense, and they're really not only physically demanding, but they're emotionally and mentally demanding. And you're putting somebody under a real rigor when you're doing an interrogation scene. But all of this is negotiated. Maybe you have a script that you're going to loosely follow, captor and spy, or, I don't know, military type scene, all of these things. But you're going to have boundaries beforehand, and it's really going to emphasize the importance of clear consent, because I'm not going to go outside of that parameter. I'm trying to get some information. You hold that information. That's it. That doesn't mean all of a sudden you haven't told me what I want after an hour and I'm going to hose you down, because we didn't negotiate that. But if we negotiated beforehand that we might bring in aspects of either heat or cold or water or air, sure, if everybody's agreed, then, all the power to you. But where scenarios that involve elements of fear or adrenaline or even vulnerability within this controlled environment, people can experience these heightened senses of arousal and psychological immersion. And there's a lot of bread and butter for a lot of people here because a lot of people enjoy this style of play. But if we take that scale and we slide it all the way to the extreme end, we start getting into the CNC scenarios that are pushing the boundaries that really do get into this deeper psychological and emotional realm. And as I mentioned before, simulated non-consensual acts such as forced role play, extended brutality of dominance and submissive scenes where there's complete relinquishment of control entirely within the pre-established limits, or required. Such things are really going to be done with meticulous planning and trust and deep understanding of what we're going to do and what our roles are, especially when you get into things like somnophilia, or you're even talking about rape or abduction fantasies, right? So we are really going to have to make sure that if you're participating in these, you're really kind of planning all of this out. Don't do this fly by night, because if you do, probably not going to end up the way you want it. You are going to, somebody's might suffer some emotional hurt here, possibly emotional harm. And that's a big thing that we always try to mitigate inside a lifestyle. Now, no matter what you do psychologically here, CNC does serve various purposes for all of us that are involved in it. And especially as we get into this whole exploration of the darker taboo desires that some of us have. We understand it's going to be a fulfillment of our fantasies and power dynamics in the consensual context here, if you will. But any research suggests that anybody that's drawn to CNC exhibits traits of thrill-seeking and openness seems to have more elevated levels of this. And it tends to find this whole liberation and excitement in exploring these scenarios and these roles outside of the conventional boundaries of what we understand of typical BDSM, because not everybody is involved in the higher end taboo style or darker style plays, whatever you want to consider CNC to be. And that's okay, because there's enough of the fetish world to explore that one aspect, if you're not exploring that or something like needle play or anything else, there's nothing wrong with you. You're just exploring a different part of the lifestyle. But understanding this whole diverse range of CNC really does underscore the complexity and the individuality of BDSM itself. And we all understand that we're engaging this whole consensual exploration of erotic fantasies, role play, within the context of negotiated boundaries. And if we understand this whole spectrum of experiences and psychological motivations that are involved, we do promote a better understanding of what CNC is and its real role in personal and relationship style dynamics within the community itself. I, for one, I guess have dabbled in it, but I'm a big fan of interrogation scenes. I love that power control. I love pushing. I like the psychological aspects of it, because there is a lot you can do, but you have to do, again, you're doing these things responsibly, because we are pushing people outside of their norms and we're going into roles that, and by the way, I liked it long before I was involved in what I do professionally, but they're really, all of these different fantasies that are involved, these different subcategories of the CNC realm, they do provide different areas for people to explore their deeper, darker fantasies in a context that they can hopefully manage and mitigate any risk. Your risk runs higher if you're going to do this with somebody you barely know. And it's going to run higher by them doing something you may not want, violating your consent, or worse, right? CNC, just because you've agreed to do a CNC, doesn't mean at all that you've agreed to be abducted or beaten without consent. If you didn't tell anybody they couldn't punch you in the face, all of a sudden that slap happens, well, great. You are now completely off script, and you have no idea what's about to happen. So my recommendation, you're going to do CNC, at least get to know somebody, and it should be longer than 5 minutes. Otherwise, you're elevating your own risk at doing these things, and you're not mitigating that very well. So keep that in mind. All right. So I've tried to give a little bit of a broad overview here today of CNC. I know it's not going to be complete, or I'm probably missed a couple of things, or maybe some of the reactions from some of these scenarios. But from the varying intensities here to the psychological motivations that drive people, one thing is clear, that CNC not only serves as a means to explore the taboo or even the power dynamics inside of DS, but it really is a pathway for growth. And there is some self-discovery within the framework of trust and consent that I could see and make an argument for could be a lot deeper than a lot of the other aspects of certain types of play. I'm not taking away from things, but I am saying, this is a little bit of a, again, more intense style of one of the aspects of BDSM that people do indulge in. But one profound insight here is there is a therapeutic potential of CNC. Now, you heard me hang on that word because I don't want people, again, to go, oh, well, therapeutic therapy. It's not therapy. Nothing in BDSM is a therapy. There is no modality that states that BDSM is therapeutic in the capacity where it's a therapeutic model to treat any type of mental health disorder. If anyone ever tells you that, like, I don't know, out of a state of like New York or somewhere else, they're lying. Do not get involved with those people. They're charlatans and trying to take your money. I will do a show about that later on, but that definitely needs to come up sooner than later. Look, while what we traditionally view as purely erotic or recreational inside of the BDSM lifestyle, CNC does provide this space for people to really navigate and reclaim certain aspects of their lives and their past lives, things that maybe have been taken away from them, and it can give them that space to take it back. But it requires a lot of time, and it requires a lot of effort. But one thing is clear, if you're never have been big on communication before, you better damn well sure be big on communication when you're doing negotiations for CNC. You're setting up the consent, the community, the outlines for what you're going to do. Your communication better be on point. If something is not clear and you don't have a clear boundary or safety protocols, don't do it. Don't get involved. Don't agree to do a scene. Right? Because here I've done my best to kind of dispel some of the misconceptions and promote a little bit more of risk awareness inside of this part of the lifestyle. Again, I know it maybe sounds like I'm in favor. I'm not in favor or against CNC. I don't either direction. But I will always err on the side of caution. If you don't feel right, don't go ahead. Don't get yourself into a position where you're now bound. You are changing your mind and you cannot get out because they'll think it's part of the scene. And now your entire world's about to turn upside down for however long you negotiated to play. All of those things need to be meticulous. How long to play, what we're going to do. Are we having safe words? Is there a tap out or a check-in to make sure everything is okay? Right? 3 minutes can be very long 3 minutes in your life if all of a sudden this goes the wrong way. Right? Now, as CNC here really continues to evolve within the community, and I hope there's a lot more discussion generated both in the academic and definitely within the lifestyle communities. It really is essential for us to create an understanding here that respects the preferences of people that get involved in the style of play, their experiences, and even look at probably some of their boundaries and understand how they came to the conclusion for those boundaries they did for themselves. If we heighten our psychological awareness, we continue our ongoing dialogue, we really do create that whole environment where maybe even if we're not interested, but we're curious about CNC, we can learn a little bit more about it. Because I think that's kind of the whole point of this, is trying to understand. I mean, again, I come back to this point in my show, whether I have certain biases about certain activities in this lifestyle, I have done my best over these last couple of years to bring them forward and really talk about these things. It wasn't easy for me to talk about needles when I spoke to Miss Kitten. It hasn't been easy for me to talk about rope with people like Mr. Tinkertrain or Bound Ashley, all of these people that have come forth to help and talk about different aspects of the lifestyle, whether I like them or not. It's not about me. This is for the community, and that's why I'm doing this. So I think it's really important to understand, hey, I've seen CNC. I'm much more curious about it. Go and talk to somebody. Maybe find some participants. Find a submissive if you're a sub and you want to know more. Talk to them about their experience. Talk to a dominant maybe, or somebody who sets up these scenes. Understand. Ask them if they're willing to talk. That's how we begin to build a more resilient community. That's how we build much more about and learn more about informed consent. We learn more about what goes on inside of each type of play that we want to get involved with. I can tell you, if you don't ask questions, you're not going to be informed. You're not going to understand how things work. And that's just not the way the lifestyle operates. So I'm kind of curious if you've ever done CNC and what your takes on it are. Love to hear in the comments below. I'm going to put something up on Twitter, so you can feel free to follow me there. And my Twitter handle for you all is @KinkPerspective on X. Sorry, not Twitter, but on X. You can follow some more of the discussion I'm going to have there. I'm going to put this up on FetLife as well. And, I'd really like to get some more of the community feedback on this and get some people's thoughts and like to hear their opinions. If this is the first time you're following me, first time you're listening to the show, welcome. Please hit the like and subscribe button. Follow me. Rate me 5 stars, because it does really help me keep the show free for now. I'm doing my best to keep bringing this to you all without any ads or paywalls. With that being said, I do have something new on my Spotify profile. There is a donation link there. I've been asked for a couple of years, and ultimately doing this for this long, eventually it has gotten to a point. So if you'd like to make a donation to the show, you can click there. Any donation, big or small, really does help. I really do feel appreciated bringing this to everybody around the world and getting this information out there. Of course, I do all of this free of cost right now. So, if you want to, great. If not, you keep enjoying the show. The least I ask you is to rate me 5 stars. It really does help me gain a bigger audience. So let me know what you think about today's show in the comments below. And I'd like to hear more of your thoughts on CNC and this style of play. Until next time, everybody, be safe and stay kinky.